Got another popular panfish fly for you this week. This is called the Gill Getter. In pan fishing circles, there are some people that consider this to be one of the best panfish flies that's ever been created. As you can see, it has all the components that make a panfish fly really effective, especially it's got the round rubber legs. It's got some bright colors. This is tied with a fluorescent chartreuse, but I've also seen it tied in yellow and orange, as well as a fluorescent red. There's lots of different materials that you could use for the tail and the shellback on this, but otherwise it's a simple, straightforward panfish fly. It is a subsurface fly and it is weighted, so this is designed to get down deep in the summer months, or at least when the fish are down deeper. You don't have to add any weight to this if you want to fish this just a little bit shallower. So that's the Gill Getter, and we'll get started. We'll start the Gill Getter by placing our hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 3906B in a size 10. We're going to add some weight along the hook shank for this fly, but I do like a heavier wire hook, as it not only adds a little bit of weight, but it is a little bit stouter. We'll debarb the hook. Before I attach my thread, I'm going to put about a dozen wraps of lead wire along the hook shank. I'm using a .015 lead wire. Place the lead wraps right in the center of the hook shank. Push them all together so they're compact, and keep them right in the center of the hook shank. If you prefer, you could have those lead wraps at the end of the hook shank or at the very front of the hook shank to provide a little bit different action to this fly, but we're going to keep them right in the middle. For thread, I'm using a Danville 6/0 and a fluorescent chartreuse. I'm going to attach the thread right behind the eye of the hook. I'm going to wrap down the hook shank right up to those lead wraps. I don't want to keep wrapping down the hook shank, because what I'll end up doing is scooching those lead wraps down the hook shank as opposed to wrapping on top of them. So when I get to those lead wraps, I'm going to use the tag end of my thread to help me reach down and grab the back of the lead wraps and kind of pull it forward up against the thread wraps in front of it. Then I'll put a few more wraps in to secure it and start building up a thread dam right behind the lead wraps and in front of the lead wraps. Thread dam does two things for me. It will create a wedge for the lead to stay right in the spot that I want it along the hook shank as this fly is fished. But more importantly, it gives me a nice transition from the larger diameter lead to the smaller diameter hook shank. So as I'm wrapping material, body material or what, along the hook shank, I don't have a pronounced ledge from a wider diameter to a smaller diameter that I have to deal with. Smooth all of that out and bring your thread down to the end of the shank to about the barb of the hook. This is where we're going to tie in our tail. I'm making the tail and the shellback on this fly out of moose body hair. You don't have to use moose body hair. If you have deer hair and that's what you want to use, you can use that, or even calf's tail would work. Even if you wanted to use some sort of a synthetic, that would work. I'm going to cut a clump of moose hair out, and I'm going to clean it and stack it. And this is for my tail. I'll have those tips nice and even. I'll measure that to about a shank length, and I'll tie that in right where my thread is hanging. With the tail fibers secured, I'm going to cut away the excess and secure that to the hook shank. As I said before, for the shellback, I'm going to be using moose mane as well. I'm going to cut another clump out, clean it, stack it. This time when I stack it, I'm going to open the stacker so that the tips of the fibers are pointing forward. I'm going to tie in the tips of the hair because then when I fold it over the back, I'll get the darker segments of hair for the shell back of the fly, as opposed to further up, I've got a bunch of lighter sections of hair. So I'm going to lash those tips down along the hook shank. I want to make certain that they stay together and they're all on top of the hook shank. Once those are secured, I'll have my thread at the end of the hook shank. Now I'll tie in the body material. For the body, I'm using a medium nylon chenille in a fluorescent chartreuse. I'll tie in the end of the chenille right on top of the hook shank, securing the core fibers of that chenille down to the fly. Once that's secured, I'm going to advance my thread to the halfway point up the hook shank, and this is where I'll tie in the rubber legs. The legs are a medium round rubber legs in white. I've already pre-cut these to about 2.5 inches. You want to get 4 round rubber legs, but you want to keep them in pairs of 2 and 2. It's going to make it a lot easier to wrap the body chenille on and not have to deal with 8 individual legs flying all over the place. You want to take both of those at about the halfway point on the rubber legs, put them on top of the hook shank, and then just get 2 or 3 light wraps of thread around them. Then you can collect the round rubber legs on each side, and you can slide them to the sides of the fly. Once secured on the side, you can go ahead and put in another half dozen 10 wraps to really secure those down along the side of the fly. With the rubber legs secure, you can fold those back and advance your thread to just about an eye length, maybe half an eye length behind the eye of the hook. Now we're going to take our chenille and we're going to start palmering this forward. You just want to wrap this around, covering up all the thread wraps. As you can see, it's a lot easier to move those legs out of the way when you're just grabbing 2 at a time. When you get to the rubber legs in the center, you want to make certain you have one nice tight wrap behind the rubber legs, one across the middle, and then one nice tight wrap right in front of the rubber legs. What this will do is it will give us a nice uniform diameter body, nice and smooth, no gaps, and the rubber legs will look like they're just coming right out of the body. Continue to wrap the chenille forward till you get up to your thread about a half an eye length behind the eye of the hook. Remember not to crowd the eye on this, as we have the shell back. When we fold it forward, we'll have to tie that in. Trim away the excess chenille. And then we will clean up the area right behind the eye of the hook, making certain I have a nice smooth area about a half an eye length behind the eye of the hook to tie in the moose body fur for the shellback. Taking the moose body fur, we're going to fold it forward. I'm going to make certain that I get 3 or 4 nice wraps right off the end of the chenille, not right behind the eye of the hook, lashing that body fur in. I want to make certain again that I'm not wrapped up right against the eye of the hook, as I have to trim that hair off. If it's all secured, then go ahead and trim the excess hair. Then we can bring our thread down to just behind the eye of the hook and start working our thread back, covering up the butt ends of hair and tapering the head of the fly. Again, it's very easy to get carried away with making the head of this fly, so you just want to be a little bit careful. We don't need it any bigger than it needs to be to just cover all that up and make a nice smooth transition to the eye of the hook. 5 or 6 turn whip finish, and we can trim away the thread. As you can see, the darker hair fibers give me a really, really nice pronounced dark strip along the back for the shellback on this fly. Now we're going to measure and trim the round rubber legs, but we need to separate those first. If you just pop the ends of those, they'll split up. It's a lot easier to separate them when they're longer than when after we trim them. I'm going to clump all of those on top of the fly. With my index finger right on top of the fly, I'm just going to cut right straight across above the index finger, and that will trim all of them to about the same length. You could trim those a little shorter if you like them shorter, or even leave them long. It's up to you. Some head cement on the thread wraps will protect those thread wraps from the small teeth that panfish have. It'll also help secure the butt ends of the hair underneath the thread wraps. Some people will even use some UV material or epoxy on the hairs that make up the shellback to give it a little bit more protection, as well as it gives it a little bit of a sheen to it. If you get any head cement in the eye of the hook, you can simply use your bodkin or part of a feather or something, a little piece of peacock herl to clean that out. And that is the Gill Getter. Very, very popular panfish fly. Simple fly to make. You don't have to use the moose mane, the moose body hair, as I mentioned before. Some people will even use some feather fibers for the tail and like a piece of thin skin or something for the shellback. Use whatever you have. Be creative. You can tie these in some other colors, even with different rubber legs or even silly legs. Just tie a bunch up, experiment a little, have some fun. That's the Gill Getter. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.